Hey, what's up everyone? How's it going? This is Watch, and in this video we'll be doing a direct head-to-head smartwatch comparison between the all-new Apple Watch Sport and the Samsung Gear S. Now, if you're interested in seeing what the major differences are between these two, or perhaps the advantages or disadvantage that each smartwatch brings to the table for your personal unique needs and interests, this is a perfect video for you. So without any further ado, let's get right into this comparison and see which smartwatch comes out on top, all things considered. Now, the one thing you'll notice straight off the bat looking at these two side by side is that the Gear S is completely massive compared to the Apple Watch. Even if you get the 42mm version, it's still going to be quite a bit larger than even most smartwatches you're going to find in the market. Now, the 38mm version of the Apple Watch we have right over here measures about 38.6mm in terms of its height, 33.3mm in terms of its width, versus the Gear S measures about 58.1mm and about 39.9mm. So if you want to wear something discreet and casual, sometimes the Gear S certainly has some problem in attracting some unwanted attention. Now, surprisingly, in terms of the thickness, the Gear S is not that much thicker, only measuring about 2 more millimeters than the Apple Watch, as you can see. When it comes to the weight, the Gear S measures about 67 grams versus our 38mm Apple Watch Sport measures about 25 grams in terms of the case, and with the included sports band, it has a combined weight about 72 grams. Now let's talk comfort over here. Both watches, I think, are equally as comfortable once they're on their wrist. There's really no issue there. And even though the Samsung Gear S is a little bit more cumbersome to wear because of its larger size, but because it's a fairly light smartwatch, you're not going to really have any fatigue or any major complaints when you're wearing it on your wrist all day. Now, the basic version of the Apple Watch comes with the sports band, and I think it's a very comfortable band that feels great on your skin. It's very soft. There's plenty of adjustability to make sure it fits perfectly on your wrist, and once on the wrist it doesn't slide off or anything like that, so no complaints in terms of ergonomics. Now, the one thing I really like about the new Apple Watch is the fact that it's really easy to swap out different straps. Because it's using a custom magnetic latching system, it's really easy to swap out different straps if you want a specific design or specific sizes. The only downside is straps are really expensive, especially if you want to get a metal strap or some kind of unique design from Apple. They're definitely making a lot of money there. Even though it's really easy to swap out, it is going to cost you, but I'm definitely looking forward to third-party manufacturers making cool and interesting straps that people would actually want to put on their Apple Watches. The strap system on the Gear S isn't bad. It's very simple compared to the system we have on the Apple Watch. Basically, the strap itself is one giant piece of rubber that you can swap out, but of course there's basically a very limited selection of options. You don't really have any different styles of straps. You can only get a couple of different colors, but the price is a lot more reasonable. Now, there are third-party manufacturers that make straps compatible with the Gear S, but really I don't think the strapped option is a big selling factor on the Gear S. What is a selling factor is that curved display that we'll talk about later on. Now let's talk build materials. The Apple Watch comes in 3 core different flavors. You have the Sport Watch, which has the anodized aluminum finish, which is very rugged and durable. We have the stainless steel finish on the standard Apple Watch, and of course we have 18-karat gold options if you get the Apple Watch edition and pony up several $1,000s for that. Now, by contrast, the Gear S is made out of polycarbonate plastics, which is certainly not at the same level of precision and fit and finish that we see on the Apple Watch. Certainly one of the biggest things that you're paying for when you're buying any of the Apple Watches is the fact that they are a little bit hard to manufacture, and the materials that they're using are extremely premium and rare to even some extent when you take a look at the 18-karat gold versions. So that's one level of the cost that you have to factor in when getting both of these two smartwatches. Now, in terms of durability, the Apple Watch is fairly durable. Even if you get the Sport version, which has the ion strengthened glass instead of the sapphire crystal glass, which is a lot tougher, it's still pretty resistant to most of your everyday scratches and most things that you would encounter on an every day-to-day basis. But of course, if you push the limits, the screen will exhibit micro scratches, and even if you're quite vigorous with it, it's pretty hard to crack. The most vulnerable portion of the Apple Watch is actually the rear portion of the watch, which houses the optical heart rate monitor, which is in a dome formation, so that can definitely crack if it's subject to extreme pressure. Now, the Gear S isn't quite as durable as the Apple Watch, mainly because of its build materials, but thankfully both of them are actually water resistant to quite a bit of extent. We actually actually did extensive testing on the Apple Watch, found it no problem in even fully submerged circumstances for 30 seconds, no issue whatsoever. And the Gear S is actually officially certified for IP67 rating, so that means it's both dust and water resistant. So even though I still wouldn't recommend these two watches for any deep sea divers out there, just note that they are water resistant, just not waterproof. Now let's talk about how you actually control these two Apple Watches and which has the better control interface. Starting with the Apple Watch, it has a couple of different methods of input. Firstly, it has a fully capacitive touch display. In fact, the touch display is actually force sensitive. So depending upon how much pressure you're sending to the screen, you're allowed to do a couple of different things. So if you want to change your watch face, you actually will click a little bit harder than normal to basically pull up all the different watch faces where you can customize them and things like that. And depending upon what kind of application you're using, you can also use the force touch feature as well, which is pretty darn cool. Now, the one big kind of innovation I think Apple has done is with something called the digital crown, which is the dial on the side. Now, this dial is extremely intuitive to use. It's one of the best input and control devices I have ever come across in any smartwatch, and really depending upon what kind of application you're in, it'll serve to do many different functions. On top of that, you can also click it in and it acts as your home button. And just below the digital crown, we have a favorite contact button. So when you press that, you can basically pull up all of your favorite contacts and go forward from there. Now, by contrast, the Gear S is a lot more simple. It's using primarily the capacitive touchscreen for your main source of input and control. And I have to say, because the screen is curved, it's a real pleasure to use at times, especially because Tizen is such a scrolling dependent operating system that really utilizes that kind of physical attribute of the screen quite well. Now, just below the capacitive touchscreen, we have a home button. It's kind of a miniature little home button that you'd find in the Galaxy S lineup of smartphones. So it really mimics that kind of sensation that you're using a smartphone on your wrist, which some people may or may not find appealing. Now, lastly, both of these two smartwatches have an external speaker and microphone, which is definitely handy when you're trying to control it with your voice. Now, obviously, you're using different platforms. We have the Siri platform on the Apple Watch side, and we're using primarily the Samsung's own S voice system that they have integrated with the Gear S. Now, in terms of which interface is better for voice, I would definitely say that the Siri, even though it's not as good as your iPhone, is quite a bit ahead of what the S voice system is delivering on the Samsung. The Samsung is pretty good in terms of recognition, but pretty limited in terms of its functionality. Now, let's move on and talk about the displays that we have on both these two smartwatches. Now, funny enough, both of them are using fairly similar display technology. Both have OLED technology, so that means exceptional black levels with a decent amount of brights. Now, I would have to say that the Gear S isn't quite as bright as I would like it to be, and especially in the daytime when there's a huge amount of sunlight hitting the surface of the screen, it's definitely not as usable as what I found on the Apple Watch side. Now, in terms of resolution, we're looking at 340 by 272 pixels on the 38mm of the Apple Watch, what gives it a PPI count of about 290, versus our Samsung measures about 360 by 480, and that is a 2-inch display, so quite a bit larger than the display we have on the Apple Watch, and it has a PPI count of about 300. So in terms of sharpness and clarity, there's not going to be a major difference between the two, but if you want the larger display and the slightly higher resolution, the Gear S has that on you. Of course, on top of that, you have that beautiful curved display that the Gear S exhibits, which is a fantastic design look and something that definitely looks pretty futuristic in my opinion. Now let's talk sensors over here. Both of these have a fairly similar selection of sensors. They both have an accelerometer, a gyroscope, and an ambient light sensor. So both basically have the ability of when you're actually flipping your wrist up towards your face and looking at the watches will automatically turn on, and they both have a pretty good response time in doing that kind of motion. Furthermore, both of these two have a optical heart rate monitor at the back of the watch, so they do a pretty good job of monitoring your heart rate, especially when you're doing any kind of vigorous physical activity. So if you're going to be using these things for exercising, they both have that kind of option, and they both have their slew of health-related apps to monitor every type of physical activity you're going to be participating in on a day-to-day basis. Now, one component I definitely have to mention on the Apple Watch is the Taptic Engine. Engine, which basically provides a little bit of a haptic feedback when you get an alert for a notification on your iPhone. Now, the one real cool factor about this is it gives you a pretty convincing sensation that somebody has actually physically tapped you on your wrist. And the great thing with this, if you're in a meeting or something like that and you actually mute the speaker, when you get a notification, nobody can hear the actual vibration, only you can feel it, which is great for privacy. Now, moving forward, talking about the internal specs we have on both of these smartwatches, there's really not a lot to talk about. Basically, both of them are using their own kind of special processors that are designed to run harmoniously with the OS. We're using the S1 processor on the Apple Watch, which is Apple's own kind of configured chip to run with the Watch OS we have on the Apple Watch. We do have 8 gigabytes of internal memory, so that's good to know for future apps that use a lot of memory. We do have plenty of it. Now, the Gear S uses a dual core chip that is clocked about 1 gigahertz. It has 512 megabytes of RAM, and we have 4 gigabytes of internal memory. Now, the Gear S is quite snappy in terms of its operation, so there's really no major complaints in terms of speed, but just due to the nature of the Watch OS we have on the Apple Watch, things feel a lot more kind of fluid and dynamic on the Apple Watch, and because it has a pretty powerful GPU inside, it can actually do some nice animations that look very smooth and very graceful. Now, moving on, let's talk about the connectivity options we have on both of these two smartwatches. Now, both of them have 802.11 GBNN Wi-Fi. They both have Bluetooth 4.0 and NFC. Now, the NFC on the Apple Watch is specifically designed to interface with Apple-related products, so it's not universal NFC, but it is using the near-field communication technology, but just done in a restrictive way for specific Apple devices. Now, the really cool thing about the Gear S and the big selling factor is the fact that it is a fully fledged smartphone. You can actually use it to make phone calls. It has a nano SIM compartment at the back of the device, and it's compatible for both GSM and HSDPA networks, and you can get it unlocked or with a specific provider if you so desire. And even though in the initial setup on the Gear S you still need a Samsung phone to initialize the device, but once you've done that, you can use it as a standalone smartphone. Now, some may think that this feature is kind of overkill and mostly impractical for some, but you have to admit that it's still a cool feature nonetheless. Now, moving forward, let's talk about compatibility. And the fact of the matter is that both of these two devices are conduits for their larger smartphone brethren. So basically, it depends on what camp you're on, whether you're on the Apple camp or the Samsung camp. If you go with the Apple camp, you're going to need to basically have an iPhone 5 or newer that's running iOS 8.2 or newer. So if you don't have that iPhone particularly, you can't use the Apple Watch, unfortunately. On the other side of the fence, Samsung is in the same camp as Apple in the sense of exclusivity. You're going to need a Samsung smartphone device to basically initialize your Gear S, and even though you can use a lot of the aspects of the Gear S independently, it's still kind of a conduit towards your Samsung smartphone. So in both cases, you're going to have to be fully committed to one company or the other. So unlike Android Wear devices where they're a little bit more compatible, you don't have those kind of compatibility options on these two smartwatches. Now let's finally talk about battery life. Now the first thing that we're going to mention is the actual battery capacity itself. We have about 300 milliamp hour battery on the Gear S versus about 205 milliamp hours on the Apple Watch. Now the cool thing about the Apple Watch is it has a really cool way to charge your smartwatch, basically using an induction magnetic charger that comes in the box. Really simple and easy to use. And even though the charging dock system that we have on the Samsung Gear S isn't as slick and as easy to use as the Apple Watch, but it does have a cool feature that the dock itself is actually a 350 milliamp hour battery extender. So that's quite fantastic. You could essentially double your battery life. Now let's get it down to the nitty gritty over here. Let's talk about my user battery life test. Now I basically use both smartwatches for a couple of days, and then I just average the amount of hours I got on each battery run. So keep in mind, I made sure that the parameters were as similar as possible. I basically set the screen brightness to about half, and obviously it's going to be different from day to day because I'll get different notifications, but generally speaking, I'm just basing everything on my personal user habits, and on average, I got about 17 hours and 28 minutes on the Gear S versus I averaged around 10 hours a 18 minutes on the Apple Watch, which is quite a big difference, and that might be due to the fact that the Apple Watch may just have a brighter screen, and the fact that it does measure things like your heart rate and your footsteps on a more frequent basis. Now, there is a power reserve mode, which will allow you to probably get better battery performance and get throughout the day a little bit more easier. But the fact is, you're probably going to want to charge your Apple Watch pretty much every night, which most people are going to do so anyway. So not a big issue there. The Gear S is definitely more versatile in terms of its battery life. It's probably a little bit more of a simpler device that has less things running in the background, and that way you can achieve a little bit better battery performance. Additionally, you do have that larger battery, which definitely helps it out as well. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about is the overall price point of these two smartwatches. The Apple Watch Sport from the baseline configuration retails for around $350, and the Samsung Gear S goes for around $330, and obviously the pricing will fluctuate depending on sales and where you get it and things like that. We'll have links in the description down below for more information on pricing. But really, which one you're going to select is completely up to you. Hopefully this video gave you some sort of understanding and direction on what each smartwatch has to offer, but at the end of the day, it's going to be whether you want to go with the Samsung ecosystem or go with the Apple ecosystem, and which system fits your personal needs and your existing hardware and phone. But really, other than that, guys, that's really it. Make sure to check out our channel where we actually have some durability tests that we did on the Apple Watch, both in terms of its water resistant capabilities, and we also made a video on how durable it is in terms of scratch and impacts, where we actually run it over with the car. So definitely check out those two videos if you haven't already. We'll have some other comparisons up on the channel, so definitely check those out as well. But really, other than that, that's really it for this video. Take care. Thanks again for watching.